I'm incredibly honoured to be standing here talking to you all, to be visiting Ireland again after 4 years. The last time I was in Ireland, or in Dublin, was just before COVID, and how things have changed since then. But I'm really delighted to be back here again. Turning up at the airport yesterday, and the woman who showed me to my taxi rank had a big smile on her face. The taxi driver was incredibly welcome, and I'm sure you all will be as well, by smiling through my presentation. So I'm speaking to you this morning about equity, diversity, and inclusion, and how this acts as a sustainable solution to dealing with some of the country's challenges that we face in the built environment. Why am I qualified to be standing here, to have flown over from the UK to come and speak to you this morning? This slide hopefully gives you a bit of an insight into my career journey. I'm an engineering geologist, started off my career with a degree in engineering geology from the south of England, University of Portsmouth, followed by a master's in environmental management. I worked for small, medium, and large-size engineering companies across the country, including being associate director of one of the largest engineering companies before I started off on my own. I'm a fellow of the Institution of Civil Engineers. I'm an honorary fellow of the Royal Institute of British Architects. I'm not an architect, I'm an engineer, but I'm an honorary fellow of RIBA. I'm policy chair for construction for the Federation of Small Businesses, which essentially means that I represent small businesses in construction to the UK government. I am a trustee of the Mayor's Fund for London, and what I must say is that standing here talking about EDI, for me, is an intersection between my expertise as an engineer and my passion, being the only black woman in the UK to run an engineering company in construction the size of Jomas. I sit on the Prime Minister's Advisory Committee for the King's Award for Enterprise. I also more recently joined the SME Business Council, advising the UK government on matters relating to SMEs. I'm a huge, and that's my passion, I'm a huge advocate for women in engineering, for diversity in construction, and it was really pleasing to hear Anne-Marie talk about getting more women into construction. I'm an international speaker for my sins, and hence standing here talking to you this morning. However, it does feel like Ireland's only an hour and a half from home, and it takes me a lot longer to get to some parts of England than it took me to get to Ireland yesterday, but international nonetheless. Huge social mobility campaigner. I'm determined that we create an environment that's fair for everyone. As you can see in a couple of the photos there, I've spent some time with prime ministers, visiting number 10 for those of you that have visited the UK. I've met and advised the last 3 prime ministers, even though I will not be blamed for any wrong decisions that were made. I've won a number of awards, and I'm not going to list them all out because I ran out of space, but I am humble. She says, having listed all her awards on a slide. But I've been honored with being named most influential women in construction, and the rest of them, as you can read on that list, but also being interviewed by various media channels and TV channels, and having my voice heard. So I think that demonstrates, and I hope shows you why I'm standing here talking about the challenges that we face in construction, but also how EDI is a sustainable solution to some of those challenges. It's based on what I will be speaking to you today is based on my lived experience as somebody who has found her way through that needle hole. So, as well as everything else that I've talked about, I run a business of geotechnical engineering and environmental consultants, 15 years of running the business and successfully doing so across the UK and now globally, and hopefully in Ireland. I'll throw that one in very quickly. Right, so what is EDI? Equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I use equity rather than equality. And I know historically we would have used the word equality, but I think the graphic I've got on this slide explains the difference between the two. Equality is a level playing field. We say that all the time. We want to have a level playing field. Actually, I don't want a level playing field because we all come from different backgrounds. some need a leverage. They need a bump up, as you can see in that graphic, to be able to be on the same level as others. Diversity, embracing the differences. And I'm explaining this because I know that, we speak about EDI, but there are a number of people who do not understand what EDI means and the importance of EDI. Diversity, embracing differences in backgrounds, perspectives, in experiences. And we speak about diversity more than we speak about EDI, because diversity has become a box-ticking process for many organizations. We want to have women in the room, tick that box. I want to have an ethnic minority in the room, box ticked. I want to have a disabled person in the room, tick a box. That's diversity. But what's really important is inclusion. And inclusion is creating an environment where everybody feels valued, where everybody feels psychologically safe. That's what inclusion is. And I'd like to explain an analogy that I use. So just imagine that you're hosting a community party for your neighbors, and you're looking at your guest list and considering who to invite to that party. And you look at the guest list and you think, right, I need to make sure that I've not left anybody out. I've got some women there, I've got an Indian there, I've got a black person there, I've got I've got everybody in the room. So you're ticking the box, making sure nobody's left out. That's diversity, and that's what we do within our organizations. What is inclusion? Inclusion is picking the phone up and having conversations with those people, understanding what their allergies are, understanding what music they like to listen to, and making sure that you play their music at the party, that you make them feel part of the party. When you set your table arrangements, it's making sure that they're not sat at the back of the room, but they're included at that top table. So you're not just box ticking, you're including them in that party. You're making sure that they feel welcome, that they feel part of the party. I think it's really important that you let that resonate in your mind when you think about the workplace, when you think about attracting talent, diverse talent into businesses, that you make sure that when they come through the door, that you make them feel welcome, that you make them feel a part of that organization. Now that I've explained what EDI means, from my perspective, let's look at Ireland's performance. We're not doing much better in the UK, by the way, so only 9%, and I'm looking at construction specifically, only 9% of the construction workforce is female. I walked into the room this morning and I said to Kelly, who very kindly met me at the door, where are the women? Where are they? There are probably 9 women in the room, which I guess is the 9%. But how do we get more women in the room? How do we get more diversity in the room? I'm sure there are more women in our industry, but will they join these events knowing that there will be only a few of them in the room, knowing that they might be sat right at the back? How do we get more diversity into the room and be intentional about making it work? I looked at data, and this is again from my UK perspective, purely from Google and friends. Ethnic minorities couldn't find any data. Business ownership, how many women run businesses in construction? Are there any of the 9% in the room who run their own businesses? Anybody? Yes. One, goodness me, 3%. There you go. We're doing well. I've got some stats. I've got some data. But what I did find from my research was 19% of CEOs in Ireland are female. 50% of the population is female, but 19% are female CEOs. And 9% of the 50% work in our industry. I looked at disability. Again, I couldn't find data. But actually, when you look at the European Commission's report for Ireland, Ireland has the largest disability gap in the EU at 38.6%, comparing to the EU's average at 24.4%, and the UK's average at 28%. Numbers are stark. diversity is an issue. How do we get this resolved? How do we create a space where everybody feels welcome? How do we create a space where everybody can thrive? And I say all of this, and I know in the back of your mind you're thinking, I recruit talent. I mean, I've heard that so many times. I don't exclude anyone that comes to an interview. If they're good for the job, I give them the job. That's not true. I'll tell you why in a second. But before I do, I want to tell you why. So what? So what? Why are we all talking about EDI? What's the big deal? Again, it's worth educating ourselves, as I have, because I've worked in industry. I've found my way to the very, very top in my country. However, as I said before, I am the only person who looks like me who has managed to do so. Just because I have doesn't mean that everybody has an equal opportunity. So now let's look at some of the research that's been done. McKinsey & Company produced a report in 2022 which demonstrates, I don't know if you're aware of this, but companies that are diverse, that are equitable, that are inclusive, perform so much better. How many CEOs do we have in the room? Can you just put your hand up if you're a CEO? Right. So, ultimately, as a CEO, you want your companies to perform better. You want your companies to have the maximum amount of profit that you can generate. I'm a CEO. I know that that's certainly what I want. EDI is a solution for this, and the stats demonstrate the impact of having diverse teams. When you have gender diversity in your team, from the McKinsey report, they're a global research company. Companies perform 25% better with gender diversity, 36% better with ethnic minority diversity. And that's because you've got different perspectives in the room, different ideas in the room. That's why the companies perform better, and ultimately makes you more money. And I know that ultimately that's what we all want. Am I correct? No? No? Good, okay. Phew, I can carry on. Right, so I looked at Ireland's challenges, again, from my UK's perspective, and I looked at some of the challenges that you will be talking about this morning and early afternoon. Climate challenges, rising sea levels, extreme weather conditions. I know that you're aiming for net zero by 2050, 51% reduction by 2030, compared to the 2018 baseline. Surely, to get this across the line, it's important that you have different perspectives around the table. To have tangible solutions, it's important that you have the other 41% of the population around the table assisting with these decision-making. Infrastructure challenges. Again, you've got aging transportation. Surely you can make this work by getting diverse views around the table, by understanding the needs of the communities that you serve. How do you create an environment that's suitable for women when there are no women in the room having input into that decision-making? Housing challenges, affordability, availability. We speak about affordable homes, and this is an issue in the UK as well. But how do you make those decisions without having people from marginalized groups in the room, in your teams, to be part of that decision-making? Now let's look at construction challenges. And this is one that we face as well, and something that we're working really hard to tackle as part of my work within the SME Business Council. But I know that in Ireland, there are 284,000 workers required over the next 6 years for Ireland to meet your housing and climate challenges or targets. What's the solution? You've got 41% of the population. I think that's the starting point to attract them into construction jobs, into your workforce. So actually, this isn't just about box ticking. EDI isn't just about doing what's right, even though it is extremely important to do what's right. EDI is a solution to the problems and to the challenges that we face. The KPMG report on the 2024 budget states very clearly that it is totally impossible. You do not have the resources to deliver on the projects that are in the budget. The resources, the workforce just isn't there. EDI is a solution. You'll be talking this morning about other solutions, but I think the starting point is to attract people who are excluded in one shape or form from our industry. Best practice. So this is some of my ideas that I'd like to share with you. First and foremost, data. I couldn't find the data. Doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but it needs to be readily available. And it isn't, because I couldn't find it. And you only need to type any question into Google or AI these days, and the information comes up if it's available, and it didn't. So data first. And I will encourage, ACEI, maybe any other organizations, to look at the data that's available on EDI. Inclusive procurement. I bang on about this all the time, putting EDI first at the core of your procurement practices. It's a starting point. Bringing on a supply chain that's diverse. Encouraging women and diversity into these conversations. It's pretty important. Everybody in here has a female colleague. Bring them along. Community engagement. Monitoring engagement with diverse communities. But it's important to be intentional about this. On one of my previous slides, and I'll tell you what intentional is. On one of my previous slides, I mentioned expansion over division. And I love to tell stories, so I'll tell you one story, and hopefully I still have some time. I'll tell you a story about expansion, because you probably haven't heard, and this is new to me as well. Expansion is new to me. But I think that we must appreciate that naturally, as human beings, we are divisive. Naturally. Does anybody agree with me? Good, there you go. See, this is why you need women in the room, because you get diverse perspectives. Right, so naturally, we are divisive. And I'll tell you why. I grew up with 4 brothers. I have 3 sons. They all support various football teams. And you only have to sit in the room when one team is playing against the other. They are like enemies in the room. But actually, bringing that to our day-to-day life. And I'd like to tell you, I watched a TEDx talk delivered by a lady called Maria, and she spoke about expansion over division. And she cited an example. She was running a workshop, and within that workshop, she asked the question, she said, I'm in the room with a group of people. I'm in the room with some fantastic engineers this morning. I've got a really controversial topic, a really controversial question. I want to understand what side of the room you sit in. Athletes taking the knee during the national anthem. A topic. Is everyone aware of this? Has everybody considered this topic? Where do we sit? And I'm not asking you, but in your mind, think about, what your opinion is on whether athletes should take the knee or not during the national anthem. But she put this to the room at this workshop, and she asked the question. I want to hear some views, because I want to understand. I want you to understand that we're divided in our various communities. We're divided in our homes, just based around our views. We're divided in our families, husband and wife, children, at work. We are divided just based around our own perspectives. So she asked the question. She said, I want to hear your views. And this man put his hand up, a white man put his hand up, and he said, I am totally, and she asked him, what are your views? He said, I'm totally against taking the knee. I'm a war veteran. I fought in combat. I lost colleagues in combat. When these athletes take the knee during the national anthem, I think it's disrespectful. I think that they should stand and salute the flag. I lost my best friend in combat. It makes me cry to see them take the knee. And that was his view, very powerful. And she turned to the other side of the room and said, "Are there any other views?" And this black woman put her hand up and said, "I'm also a veteran. I also fought in combat. However, I've lived my entire life dealing with racial injustice. I've brought up 2 sons, and every time they walk out the door, I don't know if they're going to come back home. Every time they walk out the door, I tell them just before that if you get stopped by the police, you put your hands behind your back and you just say, 'Yes, sir.' When the athletes take the knee, it's a sign of solidarity. It makes me feel like we are one. And that's what taking the knee means to me." 2 totally opposite sides of the spectrum. I listened to both, and it brought emotion to my heart, both sides of the story. Divided, we shouldn't be. Expansion is what we must consider. And what is expansion? It's understanding that we all have different perspectives in how we approach life. We've all got different ideas, but my perspective may not be the truth. My perspective may not be your truth, but it doesn't mean that it's wrong. But expansion is the ability for one idea and another to walk across that bridge and meet in the middle at the compromise stage, to accept and understand that we have different perspectives, to not be divided, to not be enemies, but to compromise and stand in our truth. That's what expansion is. Now let's take that to EDI. I will never forget that, by the way, because I'm torn on that particular topic. But let's take that back to EDI and understanding different people have different lived experiences, whether you're a man or you're a woman, whatever social economic background you come from. And I tell my children all the time, you are black, but you are privileged because we've worked bloody hard to send you to the best schools. There will be people from different classes who are different. When you recruit, you understand people come from different backgrounds and different perspectives, and you open your mind and you educate yourself to the different perspectives and understanding what those different perspectives are. Your perspective may not always be the truth, but it doesn't mean that it's wrong. So, community engagement. Coming back to this slide, sorry. Community engagement. And that takes me back to that point, community engagement. Understanding in design. I tell stories because I think they're so powerful, but then you bring them back into the work and into our design and in understanding why it's important to have the perspective of others in community engagement, in design, in collaborating with marginalized groups, in understanding the lived experiences of various different people, in inclusive design. One final story that I will tell you. I was 4 or 5 years ago, bought a little project because I wanted to move home. I bought a cottage, and I thought, I'm going to build this. I work in construction. I can deal with a big project. But it was a cottage with fairly low ceiling, which I'm 5'4" without heels on, which is why I always have my heels on. But I'm 5'4", so low ceiling was nothing, didn't mean anything to me. My builder was 5'5", so my architect wasn't much taller than us. So we designed this great property without thinking about the height. And then my son, who is 6'2", came to look at the property and couldn't get through the door. So that's community engagement, because when he walked through, I realized that we needed to do something about raising the ceiling. So just consider that, because if you surround yourself with a room of people who think like you, who are exactly like you, then the design will always be just for you. So let's really think about that in engagement and in collaborating with others and inclusive design. And finally, it's so important to set targets, because we've got the baseline with the data first, and then we set targets to make sure that we're held accountable in terms of what we achieve on EDI. I mean, we've got climate targets. We must have EDI targets as well. Thank you very, very much for listening. Thank you.